boomers have incurred some debt in their lives, either by taking mortgages out on their houses or perhaps a loan to buy a car or a cottage. But while most of us try to be debt-free by the time we face retirement, many of us just haven't paid off those loans yet.
And as a result, we're facing the stage in our lives when our money supply will be even more important, but we still have debt obligations hanging over our heads. So what can we do? Well, with us now is Jeffrey Schwartz, Executive Director of Consolidated Credit Counselling Services of Canada, a not-for-profit charity. And Jeff, we don't want to scare our viewers, but can you give us a sense of what proportion of boomers would you say are facing debt into retirement?
Well, there was a recent study by CIBC that just came out and said that over half of Canadians are carrying some form of debt into retirement. And it gets a little bit scary after that, and I know we don't want to do it, but sometimes we need to bring in the reality. 40% of those, approximately 40% of those, are carrying some form of credit card debt, which typically is a little bit more expensive. And that's a concern, because that's where we have to service that debt and interest rates are higher, so we're not really getting as much bang for our buck, if you will.
Is there a safe level of debt that people can go into retirement with, or would you say clear all your debt, before you get your gold watch?
Well, my suggestion, if possible, is to clear all your debt. Really, if you're carrying debt into retirement, it's an expense that you don't necessarily need. And many boomers, I'm a new boomer in the club, and if you're carrying that type of debt into retirement or into years where potentially your income is going to drop, then that's an expense that's just going to take away from your income. And if you look at the average numbers and you go to StatsCan and you pull out some average numbers in terms of what type of income people are bringing in and what type of debt they're carrying, whether it's mortgage debt or credit card debt, you could easily add another 10 to 15% onto your income if you didn't have these expenses. And you can do a lot of those things, especially when people have very little prospect for increasing their income going into retirement, and in fact it's likely going to decrease.
Jeff, why is this problem so large? You mentioned a large proportion of people are carrying debt into their retirement, and it surprises me because it's not as though we don't know that debt is not a good thing to have, and it's not as though retirement is something that we didn't know was coming. Have we just been irresponsible as consumers and as adults, or have other factors prevented us from being as prudent as we should have been?
Prevented is an interesting word there, because that can go either way. I mean, that indicates maybe something got in our way. Yeah. And I don't know if that's the case, but let's look at about 30 years ago. All of a sudden, over the last 30 years, I think our attitudes and our behaviors towards spending has changed. It became more about instant gratification. It became about buy now, pay later, keeping up with the Joneses. And really, it became about I want versus I need. Yeah. And there are three factors that are largely responsible for that. One of them is marketing. Marketers became very good at touching all of our buttons, looking at what they need to say to get us to buy their product now and not wait until we had enough money to do it. One of the other factors is affordability. If you look at the interest rates over the last 30 years, somewhere in the 80s they peaked, the mortgage rates peaked in the high teens. Yeah. And since that time, it's really been a steady decline. And all the other interest rates have kind of followed suit. So it's really become a lot more affordable to carry debt and live beyond our means. And the last one is probably, kind of goes hand in hand with the second one, and that's access to credit. Since that time, it's been very easy for Canadians to access credit, to go further into debt, to live beyond their means. And the banks have come out with new products, new and easy products. There have been new lenders that have come to the forefront that have made it easy. And on top of that, we've also had housing prices or a housing market that's been very solid in Canada, and that's allowed us to draw further into debt. And as a result, we can buy the things that we want. So you started off by saying, have there been things that have prevented us from doing it? Well, I'm not so sure prevented might be the right way to look at it, but have there been incentives or enticements for us to go further into debt and change our attitudes towards spending? And I would say yes, there have been.
So many of us are probably under the mistaken belief that the Canada Pension Plan or Old Age Security will land us in a soft spot when we do get into retirement, and those debts will be something we can manage at that time because we'll have all this money coming in. So there's not going to be all that money coming in. How are we going to be able to manage that debt when we're on fixed incomes and not very generous ones at that? Can you see a future where we'll be strangling ourselves with our debt?
Well, I think it's a big concern. I mean, one of the things, I mean, I wasn't always in the industry that I'm in, and hearing all the stories and working with people, I've become a bit of a nervous person around managing my own finances, making sure that I have enough for retirement. You read the stories about the changes in the pension plan and what's going on with the government and how they're constantly having to feed it. Is there going to be enough? Population structure, there's a whole large group of us coming up right now, and is the pension system going to be able to handle it? And it's concerning to me. I'm going to tell a quick story. A couple of years ago, I was taking my car in to be repaired to a dealership, and then they offered a shuttle service back to my office. And the person who took me back, who drove the shuttle bus, it was a senior gentleman, and I mean, he wasn't that old. My guess is that he was probably early 60s or something like that. He'd been retired for quite some time, and we struck up a conversation. And he said, you know, I retired with a very healthy pension from a transit company, and I drove for them. But when push came to shove, even with that pension, even with what he was collecting from the government, it wasn't enough for him to do the things that he wanted to do in retirement. And as a result, he said, you know, my pension and what I'm gaining from the government, that covers my expenses, it covers my living expenses. But you know, if I wanted to go out and do something, if I wanted to buy a gift for my grandchildren, if I wanted to celebrate some holidays or even take a little vacation, I really wasn't covered for that, and I didn't save enough to be able to do that. So as a result, I'm taking a part-time job. And the ironic part is he splits the 3 days that they work on the shuttle bus with another retired gentleman. So it's not some 20-something that's driving the shuttle bus, it's a 65-year-old. So the key here is, yes, that is a concern. And I even was talking to a volunteer out in the waiting room, and I mean, he's a new boomer too, and he was asking the same questions. Is the government going to provide enough for us that we can survive?
And we're talking about top-ups now in Ontario to the Canada Pension Plan, an Ontario version of that. Will that even be enough?
And the question is, it depends on you, and really I wouldn't rest my retirement on it. We're retiring earlier. If we want to retire earlier for whatever reason, I'm saving now, and I've been saving for the last 20 years, and maybe not everybody can do that, but I think the place to start is with an assessment. What do you want to do in retirement? What do you need to do for retirement? Service Canada has a great link where you can do a retirement calculator, and it takes about 30 or 40 minutes, but do that.
And on that very point, your organization has put together a brochure called Planning Your Golden Years, and I assume this is the same kind of tool that will give people some sense of how they have to approach retirement financially. And actually, before we get into solutions, tell us a little bit about your organization, Consolidated Credit Counseling Services. When did you get started, and what is your mandate?
Well, we started in Canada. I mean, technically we started in 2005, but we opened our doors back in 2007 to start helping Canadians. And really, it's to help Canadians who are experiencing some sort of financial crisis or debt management issue. And we do that through professional counseling and education. So across the country, we're licensed to do business across the country, and we do hundreds of seminars each year on topics like planning for your golden years, talking to your children about money. I mean, we have a lot of immigrants in Canada that have never been exposed to credit, so we do seminars for new immigrants on what they can expect from the banking system and credit within Canada. And then we also do things individually, one-on-one. So we'll intervene in some cases with a consumer's creditor to see if we can help them out of their debt issues and get them back on track.
So how do you do that? Do you provide counseling? Do you just, I mean, it's one thing to tell people get out of debt, but how do they do it? Do you actually counsel them through that process?
One-on-one. So we'll do it over the phone, we'll do it in person, and it's a repetitive process. I mean, the way we're set up is that you come to me, I'm not going to charge you for a session. 90+% of our services are free. The idea is that we want to get the help to the people that need it the most. So in some cases, as I said before, we will intervene on the consumer's behalf to negotiate with their creditors so that they can come to an affordable arrangement and meet their obligations without having to go bankrupt. And we try and do that on behalf of thousands of Canadians each year.
And do they know how to reach you? They find you?
Well, we hope they do. It's either through consolidatedcredit.ca or even one of our toll-free numbers.
Jeff, is there a longer term and better solution to all of this? It just seems that people are always going to be in debt, but would better education help, or for that matter, even legislation that would almost make it illegal to be in debt when you get to retirement? This is pie in the sky, and we have about 15 seconds, but is there a better solution?
Education is the cornerstone to making great financial decisions. It starts with a budget. It starts with understanding where your money's coming from and where it's going, and that's what we aim to do.
Great. Well, thank you very much for your perspective and advice, Jeff. And for those of you who might benefit from debt counseling, Jeff's organization is, again, called Consolidated Credit Counseling Services of Canada. And in the meantime, we'll be back after this break.